Okay, I guess we can start. So it's thanks everyone for coming here. We really have an excellent lecture ahead. So Gerard has been very kind to give this lecture. Well, it's very active. So he's been working at the intersection between computer graphics, computer vision, machine learning. He has won several awards. Well, at our top conferences, CVPR 20, CCV 22 and Eurographics and so on, 3DV and a few times. He's been in different places. So he is now at MPI in Saarbrücken and also at the University of Tübingen. And he's been working, as you see also from the first slide, on modeling, creating visual humans by looking real. He's had a lot of advanced statistical human body models of pose, shape, and clothing. So I think it's very, very interesting. So Gerard, the floor is yours, and thanks a lot again for being here and giving us this wonderful talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. It's my pleasure to give this lecture. For today, I plan to talk about how to train 3D human foundation models at scale. So in my group, we work at different aspects of the intersection of computer graphics, vision, and learning, as Nico was mentioning. When we look at humans, we look at two aspects of the problem. So one aspect is being able to reconstruct like a 3D motion and 3D shape of people given some observations. These observations might come from single images, from depth, from inertial sensors. And this is what we call like the capture process. But then like from this data that we capture, we also want to learn agents that are autonomous and that they have the same capabilities as real humans. So eventually we want to train virtual humans that are able to interact with the 3D world like this subject is interacting here, for example, with a backpack. We want these avatars to be able to, understand the affordances in the scene, like what they can do with the scene, and are able to move, satisfying the constraints of the physical world. And today, I want to focus on three challenges and three potential solutions on learning 3D models at scale. So three potential solutions and challenges. So the first one is like, well, we have these foundation models that are trained with billions of images, and it's a perfect avenue, right? We can leverage these to train models that really generalize. The problem is that those are inherently 2D. We have diffusion models that produce 2D images, but they cannot produce 3D directly. So there will be a question of how to actually do this. In the second part of the talk, I will talk about how to leverage, how to consume data sets that are annotated with different labels. And in this case, if we look at humans, they are annotated with different skeletons or key points on the body. And the question is, how do you actually consume this data with an algorithm effectively? And finally, we will look at synthetic data. Here we will look at the problems like domain gap, and we will see how we can use synthetic data for training models, but also how to evaluate existing models in terms of robustness to particular attributes. So we will see that synthetic data is very useful in this regard. So let's start with the first point, how to leverage foundation models, which are inherently 2D. So the task that we are going to look at here is a classical computer vision problem that has been studied for many years, which is that of reconstructing people from a single image. In this case, the input to the algorithm is this image that you can see here, and the output, the desired output, is a 3D avatar, including the texture and the geometry of the person. That's the task. And of course, you can imagine like this is very difficult because you have to complete what is not visible, right? We have to make the model hallucinate what is not observable, and it has to produce like a 3D result that is consistent. Now, to capture your interest, let me show you some results that we can obtain with our latest work, which is called Human 3D Fusion, which is basically, now we start. I hope that this doesn't happen very often, but I have to say that once this starts happening, it happens again. So yeah, please be patient. And let me continue from here. Okay, you can see the slides. Can you give me an okay, Nico?
Yes, we can see them.
We can see. Okay, great. So we can reconstruct a wide variety of objects, as you can see here, like this bride, which is holding like these flowers and like this complex clothing. Now, traditional models like are leveraging like statistical models of people without clothing, like the simple model. And to reconstruct this kind of complex clothing and people with objects, that this would be impossible, as we will see. Now, this is a complex problem because you have like a wide variety of body shapes, texture, clothing types, accessories, and so on. And so, oh no, please. Okay, this is the error of before. Okay, so we're good. So of course, like to generalize to this wide variety of, possible geometries and textures and so on, like we can leverage like a foundation model for image generation. The problem is that these diffusion models are trained to produce a single image. Now, some folks generalize this to produce multiple views of a given image. So basically, they train a diffusion model that takes 4 noisy views and it denoise them into 4 views of the subject that you can see here. So XC is the conditioning signal, and then you train a diffusion model that produces 4 views of this subject. And the results are like quite visually appealing, right? But after closer inspection, we see a lot of 3D inconsistencies. For example, like the feet are not really 3D consistent. If you would attempt and 3D reconstruct this using standard multi-view geometry, you would find that the 3D structures are blurred. And that's because this diffusion model is producing the 4 images, and it's very difficult to produce pixel-aligned 3D coherent results. So one solution might be, well, I can get these 3D, these multi-view images, and I can attempt to produce using a sparse regressor, like a nerve representation or a sign distance field or a 3D Gaussian splat representation. Now, the problem is that if you attempt to do this, because these multi-view images are already inconsistent, we are going to get like a 3D reconstruction, which is also inconsistent. So as I say, this is basically trying to fix problems instead of trying to prevent them. And so problems that you would encounter are things like this kind of ghosting artifacts. This is typical of when you have multi-view that is not perfectly aligning. It kind of aligns, but not quite. So what is our idea to fix this problem? So just to remind you of what diffusion is doing, you start with some noisy signal xt. This is full noise here. And you take a series of steps to denoise this signal into x0, which is the signal that we want to recover, which is a sample from the distribution. Now, the problem is that at every step, we are going through these blue dots, which, by the way, each of these blue dots represents 4 images, right, of these 4 views of the model. Each of these blue dots represents one of these, and they might be multi-view inconsistent. However, there is a manifold of multi-view consistent images, which are basically projections of 3D models. And so what we can do is at every step during the diffusion process, we can project to this manifold such that at every step, we're making sure that these multi-view generated images are multi-view consistent. So that's the basic idea at a high level. Now, the question is, how do you actually achieve this? So the key idea is to have a synchronized 3D Gaussian splat reconstruction module and a 2D multi-view diffusion model. And they are synchronized at each diffusion step so that they talk to each other. So essentially, like the 2D multi-view diffusion model places a strong prior for the 3D Gaussian reconstruction, and the 3D Gaussian reconstruction makes sure that this 2D multi-view diffusion is 3D consistent. Because like if we render this 3D representation by construction, like these rendered images are multi-view consistent. Now, in more detail, here's a diagram of the method. There's a lot of moving pieces, but bear with me. I will guide you through this overview. So we have like here like this noisy signal xt at the highest noise level, and standard diffusion, you would basically take a series of denoising steps until you obtain x0, which is basically the signal that you want to recover. In this case, is the 3D Gaussian splat representation of this input image xc. Now, at every diffusion step, we're not just removing noise, but we are having a more involved process. So what is this involved process? To go from xt to xt minus 1, what the model is actually doing is going from xc, like you pass this to the multi-view diffusion, and you obtain like an estimate, what you can see the images here. This estimate might still be 3D inconsistent, but we pass it now to a 3D generation module along with the noisy images and the conditioning image. And this generation module produces like a fixed number of Gaussians to represent the human. And these Gaussians are then rendered. By construction, these rendered images are 3D consistent. They might be not very accurate, but they are 3D consistent. And then basically like we have a reverse noise sampling. We add noise and we backpropagate, importantly, through the 3D generation model and the 2D multi-view diffusion model. So basically the trick here is that at every step, we are lifting to 3D, rendering and backpropagating through both the 3D generation and the 2D multi-view diffusion. So this is the key message from this work, is that the 2D multi-view diffusion model and the render diffusion model are synchronized at each time step, such that the 3D model benefits from the multi-view prior, and the 3D model guides the multi-view sampling at each step. Now, let me show you a few more results, which demonstrate that this model actually generalizes like quite nicely to a wide variety of humans in clothing and holding objects and so on. And the reason like it has this strong generalization is because it's leveraging this diffusion prior, which is trained on billions of images. And the reason that it's really consistent is with this strategy that I've just described. Now, some people might wonder, well, how does this compare to a more classical approach of fitting like the simple model and then trying to deviate from this simple model to explain the clothing? Now, this will work for very simple clothing, but if you have clothing like this bright, basically this will never work with a simple like structure because like it's too far away from a naked body. And even models that are specialized to capture clothing like will also fail in this case. Now, here's another interesting example where what we can see here is like this lady holding like this board, and oh, sorry, this is not as I expected. Oh, this slide is incomplete. Sorry. What I want to show you here is that the model is generating like the arms at the other side of the board, so that it's really showing that the model is generalizing to a wide variety of instances. Now, the model does not work only for humans, but also works for humanoids like this Ninja Turtle. Now we have an extension that also works for any kind of object, basically, because the model is generic to this. Now, it also works for, for example, a pregnant woman or like two people, as you can see here, while the model is never explicitly trained to track and reconstruct two people, right? So this is showing this generalization power of leveraging these diffusion models. And as I was saying, like there's a journal version of this work in which we generalize this to reconstruct objects, essentially. So nothing in this pipeline is very specific to humans. And in this work, in this journal extension, which will come up soon, hopefully, we show that we can reconstruct a wide variety of objects. Okay. Do we want to have the questions at the end? I suppose yes, right?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe yes. Otherwise, I mean, if somebody has a question, maybe you can write it in the chat.
Sounds good. Then I continue.
Yes.
Okay, so now let me move to the second part of the talk, in which I'm going to talk how to train models that are learned from multiple data sets with a wide variety of annotations. So here we look at the similar setup, like we have a single image of a person and we want to recover the human motion and shape of the person. Here, we're not so interested in the clothing and the details. We're more interested in complex poses and very highly dynamic motion. What we have is that we have an explosive growth of data sets available, which is good news. But the annotations are, of course, very heterogeneous. like people use different skeleton annotations in different data sets. So we have the goal at training is that we want to leverage these heterogeneous data sets and these different skeleton formats without having to convert from one another. And at inference, I want to have the flexibility of being able to choose which skeleton format I want to predict. So here's a snapshot of like some data sets that are made available. And this is just a few of them. There's probably more. And in this work, we basically leverage all of them. Every data set that we could find, we basically fit into our model. And this is easier said than done, right? Because like different data sets have different formats, and it's not so obvious how to leverage all these data and all these annotations. So the state of affairs is that people use different models. Some people like the simple model. Some people like the simple X because it has more detail. Some data sets are annotated with COCO annotations only. Some data sets like 3.6M have a different skeleton format. Meta has their own body model, like Amazon, and Zalando will have another body model. And basically, like we have a wide variety of body models and skeleton formats available, right? I mean, Google has another, and so on. So the question is like, how can we learn right from all these annotations without having to convert between body models, which is an ill-posed problem many times. So our idea is to turn the pose estimation problem into a key point prediction problem, but instead of predicting a fixed key point, we predict any point on the canonical surface of a body model. So basically now we turn the problem into, given an image, I want to predict, these points inside the body, but I want to have the flexibility of being able to choose which points I predict at inference and which points I consume at training time. All right, so to predict key points the standard way, and what we've learned over the last 15 years or maybe 10 years is that what really works well is like you pass the image through a vision backbone, you obtain feature maps, and then you have like convolutional layers that are supposed to detect particular key points in the image. And then you have heat map logits, and then using softmax, you obtain P prime, which is like, these points that you want to predict. Now, you typically train for a given skeleton format. This skeleton format might have like 14 joints. And this means that you need here, 14 heads for each one of these joints. That's typically how it works. Now, if I want to predict 28 joints instead of 14, I need twice as many heads. That's typically how you would do it. If you need 100, then you need 100 heads. Now, if I want to predict 1,000,000 points, I need 1,000,000 heads. And you can see that this is basically not really scaling very well with the number of points that I want to predict. It's not very flexible because I have to predetermine which skeleton I want to predict. So how can we solve this problem? Instead of having a pre-decided set of predictable points via separate weights, what we do is we have a localizer field. So this is inspired by neural implicit models to reconstruct surfaces in which every point is decided to be inside or outside the surface by a neural network. Now we have a similar idea, but now for every point, we have a localizer field that produces neural network weights, WP, right? Which are supposed to detect this particular point in the image. Now, as I move this point along the body, these weights smoothly change to predict a different point. This has multiple advantages. One, this is compact in terms of the number of parameters because the number of parameters are not growing with the number of points I want to predict because I always have this fixed localizer field that predicts WP. And second, we have like much more information sharing. So now the information that I learned to detect knees, I can leverage to detect the middle point between the knee and the ankle because those points will be correlated through this P that predicts WP. So we are basically having a much more structured learning problem and also much more flexible. So essentially like how the loss would look like if you would have infinite points annotations for a given image would look like this. It would be a volume integral over the canonical volume P, right? The canonical volume is what we've seen before. And the loss basically would say that I won my prediction, which is F of P and F are the features. In the pose space, I want this to match G of P, which is the ground truth location of the point. And I want to do well on this for any point. That's why I integrate over this volume omega H. Now, as an Euclidean, as a loss, we can choose our favorite loss to compare points. We can, for example, adopt the Euclidean loss here, which minimizes this L1 distance or L2 distance. Now, what is important is that, at training time, sometimes I'll have some key points, sometimes other key points, sometimes I'll have the full volume. And so this loss is flexible. Once I have only 14 points, I evaluate the integral only on these 14 points. No problem. If I have like 100 points, I evaluate on these 100 points. And this is how we train. Depending on the data we have, we can evaluate this loss on the data points that we have. Now, to illustrate more like how this actually works in practice, what you're going to see is like a user selecting which points they want to predict at test time on this canonical volume. And you're going to see the predictions in real time, like on these images. So let's see this in action. So the user is now selecting which key points you want to predict. And you can see how these key points are being predicted in 3D in the image. Yeah. So basically now we have full flexibility on which points I want to predict. And this means that, I'm not bound to a particular skeleton. I can choose this at test time and also at training time. All right, this is not the main message of the paper, but we can also translate points to body models like simple very easily and very efficiently with an efficient inverse kinematic. So if you ever have to transform from key points or from skeletons to the parameters of the simple body model, you can check that part of the paper and the code, which very quickly, much quicker than previous models, can obtain these parameters using an efficient body model fitting based on inverse kinematics. So the basic idea is to do like Procrustes alignment per part and then solve everything via Cholesky. And for more details, I refer to the paper. All right, so let me show you some examples for a wide variety of images on the internet. Notice like the complexity of the poses and how nicely the results align here. These are like simple models, which are obtained by fitting simple to these key points, as I explained before. So here's like an example for a dynamic sequence of a breakdance sequence. And notice how the network is convolutional, and because it predicts the points and it's very well aligned with the image, it's easier to capture the shape accurately. And so, for example, like these shapes that are a bit further from the mean are also nicely captured, including also the dynamic motion. So there's no tracking here. This is a frame per frame estimation. Like we do a bit of smoothing so that it doesn't look so jittery, but these are single frame estimates. And yeah, so this constitutes right now the state of the art in human pose and shape estimation. Yeah, but I want to highlight that the nice part is that we can consume any data set without any conversion, and we can choose which skeleton format we can predict at test time. And the code is available, so if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to check the code and then give us feedback on your experience. All right. So to summarize, we have a new state-of-the-art 3 human poses and shape estimation. The goal was to have a flexible training module with different annotations to leverage the scale of the data sets. We introduced this neural localizer field to predict any body point, not just predefined joints. And we have this point-based formulation, which unifies many tasks and many annotations. And the code and models are available at the following website. You can find basically any code and data from our papers you can find in our website. Okay, so with this, I will move to the third part of the talk, which is like how to leverage synthetic data. And to look at this problem, I will present a paper that we presented at CBPR in 24 last year, which is called Template-Free Reconstruction of Human Object Interaction with Procedural Interaction Generation. So again, the setup is a single image is input. And now we want to recover not only the human, but also the 3D object the person is interacting with. And this will require different solutions. Before, we had a lot of data of humans, as I was showing before, but these data sets are typically a single human performing actions, but this human is not interacting with the 3D world. Data sets of people interacting with the 3D world are much, much more scarce, and this will require us to look at different solutions for this. So the challenges, as before, are that you have a wide variety of complex motions, clothing, and so on. But now the problem is more difficult because if you're interacting with an object, the human occludes the object and the object occludes the human, making the problem even harder than before, right? So we have a diverse variety of humans, human poses, shapes, and object shapes. And in particular, we have very heavy occlusions. So as I was saying before, we have a challenge, which is a lack of data. We have like existing capture data sets that feature a lot of interactions of humans and objects, like Behave or Intercap, but these are a bit limited in terms of the objects. So Behave has in total 20 objects, Intercap has 10 objects. It's not at the scale that we would like to. Then we have other data sets like Bedlam, which are produced with computer graphics, which have a wide variety of humans interacting in the world. And we have Objaverse, which has about 10 million 3D objects. So how can we leverage this data efficiently? Well, a key idea is to generate synthetic data procedurally. So the basic assumption here is that if we take this interaction data set and we can take a human data set and we take an object shaped data set like Objaverse, we can mix and match and have multiplicative scaling in the amount of data that we have. We can replace the humans in this interaction data set and we can replace the objects to procedurally generate potentially like tons of data as I'm showing you here. So in total, we produce like about 1 million samples of humans interacting with a wide variety of objects. So the key assumption here is that if I'm interacting with an object of a particular category, like the poses will be very similar regardless of the actual geometry. So if I change the geometry of a shape, like my pose will change a little bit, but the interaction will be very similar, right? If I now change the chair to have like a wider base or like narrower base, what I have to do is adapt the pose, but the type of interaction will be very similar. That's a key assumption, which might be wrong, might be violated, but we want to generate here training data. So this is like a reasonable assumption to make to generate more data. So what we do here is we want to replace this object by any object from Objaverse. And to do this, we need to know where the contacts lie, because if the chair is now bigger, I have to make my arms wider so that I can grab from the right contacts. In order to transfer contacts, I need to have the shapes into correspondence. How can I have the shapes into correspondence? Well, there's a trick that works really well, much better than a lot of methods that are very intricate. And this is basically, I take a shape data set like Objaverse and I train an autoencoder that maps these 3D shapes into a latent space. And then you have a decoder with a fixed number of points. And by just forcing the decoder to predict a fixed number of points, these points are in locations that are putting the objects in semantic correspondence. So what you're seeing here, like these colors, like you can see this greenish and yellowish color, it means that, this is the points with the same indices. So this is sort of aligning the data semantically, which is nice because now I know, like the corner of the chair, I can know where the corner of the chair is in each of these instances. Up to some error, but that's what you can get. And so basically, now that I have this correspondence, I can compute the contacts in the source object, and I can transfer these contacts in the target object. Now, given these target object contacts, I can deform the pose using inverse kinematics, and I can jointly optimize the human pose and the object also in order to obtain like the refined interaction. So now we have a way of replacing objects, and we can do the same for the human. We can replace the human shape and the clothing also. That's not something very complicated. Using the simple model, we can do this. And we can generate, like, as you can see, this interaction with diverse set of object shapes and clothing. So these are some examples. So here we have like this diverse data set, which is available for research purposes. I encourage you to check that out if you are interested in these problems. So basically here you have like a wide variety of human shapes and clothing, and also like object shapes. Now, given this data, we want to learn a model. And basically predicting like the human and the object jointly, it leads to inaccuracies. And also we want to be able to distinguish what is the human and what is the object for downstream tasks, right? For example, we might want to edit the object, or we might want to reason about what the human is doing and where the object is relative to the human. So, and we could try to predict them separately, but then this is not like satisfying like the interaction of human and object. So we have like some sort of a hybrid approach. This is based on diffusion as well. You start with Gaussian points, and the basic idea is that the Gaussian points are iteratively at every diffusion step projected to the image. You extract features, and then basically these Gaussian points, they should converge to the shape that you desire. In this case, the human or the object. So what we do is like in the first stage, we reconstruct the human and the object jointly, obtaining a coarse prediction, and this will localize roughly where the human and the object is. And then like in a second stage, we are gonna refine this process by having a point cloud dedicated to the human and a point cloud dedicated to the object. We're gonna have also cross attention between these point clouds such that, you know, they talk to each other in order to obtain like reconstruction of the human and the object in this second stage. And let me show you some results on test data sets. So these are images that, of course, are not seen during training. They are from a completely different data set. And so I should mention here, this is trained on the Procigen data and a bit of real data. And so here's a comparison to our prior work, which was the state of the art in human object reconstruction. And what is interesting is that we can get the same accuracy or even better, although we don't make any use of any template. We don't assume we know the shape of the chair that this person is interacting, whereas Core, which was the prior work, did make use of this 3D chair template. Right? So I emphasize we don't make any assumption about the shape of the object in these reconstructions. And as I was saying, like it's useful to be able to separate the human and the object, because then you can, for example, like do some texture editing, but more importantly, you can reason further about what the human is doing with the object. Now, this work is nice, but it's working on single frames, and it makes sense to extend this to the temporal dimension. So time can be used in our advantage because we can see the object from different viewpoints, and also we can impose like smoothness over time. And this is what we do in this follow-up work, in which basically we obtain tracking results like you can see here. This person is interacting with this table, and we can nicely reconstruct the object and the human, but this time the object like it has sharper details. Now we have challenges as before. We have heavy occlusion, and we have no template. So we need to reason about both the pose and the shape at the same time. And we had prior work that already tried to do something like this, like detect which keyframes are good for tracking and which keyframes are not so good, and which frames like the human is occluding the object. And it's kind of like working, but sometimes like it's still very unstable, as you can see here. And this is the result of the single frame result, this HDM result, which is not bad, right? But as you can see, the object is not very sharp and it's a bit jittery. And more importantly, this point cloud of the human is not aligned over time. So these are points that are basically changing at every frame. The indices completely change. So I have no sense of, what is each body part in these point clouds, right? I don't have alignment. Now, if we want to do tracking, you need to basically know where points move over time. And this is basically what we do. We obtain these point clouds from this CVPR work. And the basic idea is that we're going to have like a global shape for the human that will be deformed to each of the frame instances. And we're going to have like a object shape in canonical space that will deform also to each of the time instances. So for the human, we have per frame tracking, and for the object, we have something similar, but now we have to optimize for this canonical object shape. And we need to optimize for the object poses at every time instance. So to obtain correspondence for the human part, we have a similar trick as what we did for the objects, which is training this autoencoder that predicts a coherent set of points, fixed number of points, and then we can optimize very easily the simple model to fit these points, because now these points are already having semantics. That's why these heat maps are coherent to each other, right? That's why the head is always red and the legs are always like, green and yellow. Now for the object, we have this challenge of like occlusions, but now we have an advantage. And the advantage is that we see the object from different viewpoints. Every time instance we can think is a new camera viewpoint of the object. And so that's basically what we do. We optimize a set of points in a canonical space such that when I pose them, they explain the data that I reconstructed. And so this is more of an classical optimization, which allows us to reconstruct the objects at higher detail. Yeah, so basically this is some prior work that was even using the template was still struggling to reconstruct the image accurately. And the problem is that these models were trained on too little data. Now we extended this ProciGen data set to dynamics. So we have like also the extension of like videos for these instances that I was showing you before. And then we train with these videos. And so this is the single frame reconstruction on the middle and our tracking result on the right. You can see that the shape of the table is like more accurately reconstructed. Note that it captures the squareness of this table more nicely, and also the legs. Right, so maybe that's too many numbers to consume now, but we evaluate this numerically and in terms of chamfer distance on the object and the human. Our model is better than the CVPR work, which is single frame, and it even outperforms like models that use like the templates like Core and Beastracker. Right, so let me show you a few more examples. And what I want you to pay attention is at the point cloud of a human, which is now structured, whereas before it was not structured. And also like the details of the chair, you can see that it's clearly capturing much better these details. These are some capture results of interactions on real videos. And again, admittedly, these interactions are still a little bit orchestrated, right? So these are not really in the wild. But I emphasize that this is a really complex problem because like you don't know the shape of the object. And so there's a lot of degrees of freedom that are actually missing. So we are quite satisfied with this result. So this, to conclude this work, basically is the first method to track full body dynamic object interaction without a template. I've shown this efficient autoencoder for human registration, also for registration of humans. That's a simple trick that you can read in our papers that is very effective. I really recommend using this for getting quick registration. And then basically we have like this idea of like reconstructing a canonical shape for the object and then predicting the pose at every frame and then optimizing the shape and pose over the sequence to be maximally consistent. Okay, so now, and this will be mostly the last thing that I will present in this talk, is like the use of synthetic data, not for training, but this time to evaluate how robust models are. And right now, with the real data sets, I cannot evaluate, for example, how robust a model is to gender or to a particular clothing type, because I cannot do controlled experiments. I cannot change one attribute at a time, keeping the others almost the same. And this is what we're going to like build on Gen AI. And so the idea of this project, which is called Stage, is to use Gen AI for automatic benchmark creation. So on the left, you can see like an image that is synthetic produced with Gen AI. And basically what we are doing is we're changing one attribute at a time. We're changing, for example, here from a young man to a young woman. And we can see that these state-of-the-art pose estimation methods actually sometimes fail when the only thing that mostly changed in the image is just, for example, the age or the gender or the clothing. Yeah, in this case, it changed from t-shirt to leather jacket, and this leg, for example, is failing. So one challenge in this work was to generate images that are consistent with a 3D pose, and you can read the paper to see what solution we have for this. But we made sure that these poses are very well aligned with the original ground truth pose given. And so basically what we can do now is we can change, for example, the BMI or the clothing style or the background. And what we can do is like generate lots of these pairs, not just one, but hundreds and thousands of pairs. And we can look at the statistics of pose estimators. We can ask questions like, for example, do they perform the same for a given gender, or do they perform the same for a given clothing style? And so here's, for example, like when we analyze clothing, we did the same for ethnicity and gender and so on. On the y-axis, you see PDP, which is the percentage of degraded poses. And so the larger is more alarming. It means more poses have been degraded once I change this particular attribute. And what is important to note is that we compare always modified image against a synthetic attribute image. So I'm always comparing apples and apples because I always compare performance on this synthetically generated data. And what you can see here is that, for particular clothing styles, in particular parka, we have like a degradation of poses for some methods, like here, like the different colors are different methods. A degradation of like up to 20%, up to 30% of poses. This means that by just changing this attribute, like 30% of the poses now have been degraded. Maybe one joint was flipped, or like, the pose didn't really work for this new generated set. So you can imagine that this can be quite useful, right? To before deploying models, to really test them against like particular things, the particular attributes that you expect to see in deployment. Now you might say, well, but how good are these images? Well, we can confidently say that these images are at the very least as good as like very curated computer graphics generated data sets like Bedlam, what you can see here is that the performance is almost identical. So 48.7, lower is better. We can see that the performance here of this progressive aligned MPGPE, which is the joint error, is almost identical, 48.72. So I think this is remarkable because it means that using GenAI, which is fully automatic, we can achieve the same performance on a method trained on this synthetic data. I have said that this number that you see here is like a state-of-the-art method trained on the synthetic data or trained on this computer graphic generated data Bedlam. And so what is remarkable is that this Bedlam data set required a lot of curation and a lot of like expertise to generate the scenes, like the computer graphic scenes and like the lighting and the clothing and the physics simulation and everything. It needed a lot of pieces to get these images to look realistic. And now with Gen AI, like we're automatically generating these and obtaining the same accuracy. Okay, so in conclusion, I've presented like an image foundation model. I've presented like that image and video foundation models contain a lot of 3D knowledge, but it's not consistent. But with human 3D fusion, I've presented one solution to make these models 3D consistent. And the data sets are increasing with diversity, and the skeleton formats are quite diverse. And we've shown a solution to amass all these data sets and train with a single model. We've seen that synthetic data is important. It can be used for generating training data, but I think it will be even more important in the future because it allows you to control the data generation process, and this is very powerful. And finally, GenAI can be a powerful tool to evaluate robustness and safety of current algorithms, and Stage is laying the foundation, at least for human pose estimation. And with this, I would like to conclude. Just very quickly, I don't have time to talk about these other works, but we also look at a lot at human motion generation, for example, like how physics affect the human motion here. For example, like we have like synthesis of people like carrying boxes of different weights, and the models react to the different weights of these objects. And we also look at like generation of human motion from text. For example, like we can have a text that says like person walks forward and picks up something and then walks back. And we have a recent method that basically produces like a detailed timestamp aligned text with the motion. That's what we call unimotion, such that we know at each instance what the human is actually doing, which is useful for anything that you want to do afterwards with this motion. And I would like to give a big thanks to my team. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be able to work with smart, young, talented students. And yeah, they are really like the heroes of all this work. And if you're interested in software or data, here's the QR code and also the website where you can find almost every data set and software from our papers. And now I'll be happy to answer questions if there's time for this.
Yes, thanks a lot. I mean, really impressive, Gerard. I mean, one difficult part for me is that you answer while you were going, you were answering the questions that I was prepared to answer to pose to you. Now, one thing that I will abuse of my role here first, and just I'm asking you a question, is that related to physical interaction. So one thing that came to my mind. So assuming that you have, for example, a deformation model, so you have a non-rigid object. I don't know, somebody playing with a rubber ball or something. Can you still model this type of things? Can you incorporate it into the interaction?
Yeah, no, not yet. Our models are trained on rigid objects.
Right.
We haven't tried testing our model on non-rigid objects. It might already work. It might already work, but I can imagine that having a bit of synthetic data of dynamic non-rigid objects would help to address this problem. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Now, I think related to this, it's also, I mean, the maybe guys, so we have a few questions in the chat. Maybe you can ask them directly. So Gustav, maybe it's easier to interact.
So how can I see the chat? I probably have to stop
Oh,
share.
so I can ask the question verbally instead, since that's how
Exactly,
I
exactly. That's
interpreted
the
this.
point. So, exactly.
Perfect. Let's do
Um,
this.
yes, so some very cool work here, I must really say. I'm delighted to have see this and great progress. For part two, it seemed like the main goal there was to have this field that allowed you to sort of pull in different data sets regardless of how the humans were parameterized and so on. But one thing I was curious to hear is sort of how did the performance of the method scale depending on how many different data sets you pulled in? Do you have any results on that?
Yeah, yes, that's great. I mean, they asked for this in the rebuttal. We did like I mean it of course the more data that you add the better the performance. We had to simplify a little bit this experiment, of course, because like it takes time to train these models. So it would I mean for with academic resources like it would be very difficult to train um one separate model for
Yeah.
different scale, but yeah, um it definitely improves with the data. It's very difficult to evaluate this because, like, how do you do this? You basically could say from every data set, I remove 30% or I
Yeah.
remove completely full data sets. There's the question of like which data sets are also more useful, which poses are more useful. So this is all like very interesting, but very difficult to really analyze because it's computationally expensive to train models from scratch every time. Yeah.
Well, maybe you can look at some kind of diversity measure or something. So you want to kind of get from the data set, the diverse, well, up to a point, because then you also want to get some kind of coherent poses so you can learn better. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could, for example, like have, I think we have the plot as a function of the number of images in
hmm,
total. You could have the plot as a function of the some diversity score of the poses or something like
yes.
this. Yeah.
Hmm.
But
Excellent.
definitely like adding more data keeps improving the results. That's for sure. We can say this confidently. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was my question.
Okay. So, Idil, you can ask the question directly. Other way, I can ask the question. So he's asking if the is if the autoencoder is trained for all object categories or per category. I think it was on slide 47, he says.
You catch me on that one. I would guess that is per category if I have to make a guess, but I would have to double check. I would guess that's
Yes, I wanted to ask like because like just to understand what is the difference then if we do it per object category to nail down sampling rather than like the learning method. Do we really need the learning process to predict a strict number of points there?
yeah. So the reason I think it's per category because like otherwise it's a bit ill-posed, right? What's the correspondence between a car and a chair,
Exactly.
or right? Or so that's why like it wouldn't make sense to train all jointly, I would guess. Yeah.
Unless you can
All
have
right.
some kind of super category, like if you get, I don't know, cars and buses, and so they could probably put together to some degree. So
Yes.
you can
Yeah,
do
I
a zero
agree.
shot in some sense.
I agree to this. Yes. So if you have a hierarchy, then you can
Yes.
go some levels up the hierarchy. Yes. But I think we trained a model per category. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, then there is a question by Ariel, if you want to ask a question. Well, he is asking, he or she are asking about in the object-human interaction, what is limiting the resolution, right? So does the number of initial Gaussian points is related to that?
For the interaction, right?
Yes, yes.
It's the computation, right? The more points you have, the more computationally expensive it is because you have for when you extract features, you have like cross attention. And then basically the more points you use, the more computation you need, right? It slows down the computation with the number of points.
I
So
agree.
that's the limiting factor.
Hmm.
And also, I mean, I don't know. We didn't train a model with, let's say, 1 million points. I don't know if there's a limitation also in the capacity of the model. Might be also.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Okay, a question by Rafael. Okay, he doesn't have the mic. Let me read it. So, have you tried generalizing to multi-object interactions? So, for example, you say if a person is holding a bag and pushing a chair, does it focus only on the larger object or on the active interaction?
Yeah, we haven't tried, but um, I think it's very doable. Like you would start with a semantic segmentation, right? This we have
Yeah,
tools for doing this, and then you would basically start with a coarse reconstruction of the human and the object, and then have point clouds dedicated to every object, and then diffuse that separately. I think this it's like our model does not have support for this, but it wouldn't be very difficult, I think, to generalize to this.
okay. So, any other questions? Guys, you can ask directly the question. But let me ask one more question. I'm just curious exactly where do we go from here? I mean, for example, one thing that also came to mind is that the interaction with the clothing, right? Because of course you can use simple and so on, but yes, if you have it's one that you have somebody dressed in some kind of, sporty attire, or somebody having a large gown or a crinoline or what was in the past. How would you deal with this type of situation?
Yeah, I think for clothing like this, the first work I presented, like this, leveraging multi-view diffusion for reconstruction, I think it's very promising. I've not seen results that are so generic and so generalizing so well. Because the problem with clothing is that you always have like one clothing style where your model breaks. And I
Precisely.
think this is the first model that I saw really working for a wide variety. Now, we haven't solved many of the problems. One problem is that we don't separate clothing from the body yet in this model. So we would have to have some solution for this. We haven't looked at the dynamics, but I think the solution goes through leveraging multi-view diffusion, maybe having like some generative model of clothing. That's something that we're also looking at. And then optimizing latent codes to be maximally consistent with multi-view diffusion. I mean, that's given the state of technology, that's more or less what we're thinking, like along these lines.
Absolutely. Any questions? Any other question? Well, if not, I think we are perfectly on time. So, well, thanks a lot, Gerard. I mean, very, very impressive your work, and we're looking forward for let's say the future development that you are going to have. And well,
Yeah,
thanks.
thanks.
We have a virtual applause for you, and
Yeah, thanks a lot, and it was a pleasure. And I hope to meet you in person also in recent future conferences.
absolutely, absolutely, looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Bye bye. Have a good
Thank you,
evening.
guys. Have a good evening.
Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.